But I'd like to close with one story about a friend of mine who was named Fred Jefferson. Fred was a White House butler, and Fred had been there for a very long time. He had actually come to the White House when Eisenhower was president. He'd come with President Eisenhower specifically because he had worked for President Eisenhower when Ike was the Supreme Commander, and he had been a valet for him at that time. Actually, one of the reasons that Fred and I got to be such good friends is we were both from Georgia, although I don't sound like it anymore, and he had actually started his career of sorts as Bobby Jones' chauffeur. He met Dwight Eisenhower on the golf course, and when World War II came, Ike took him, and the rest was history. And he ended up staying there actually until the Carter administration, and then he retired. Fred had more stories than anybody I ever knew, and we figured that at least half of them, if half of them were true, he needed to write a book. He was also a very thoughtful individual about what was going on in the country. So one day, this is about 2 days before the end of the Nixon administration, he came to me and he said, "Don, I want you to just come walk with me." And so we went out of the East Wing and we came around through the area, what's usually a public area of the White House, and we walked up the stairs and we walked into the East Room. And there we went to the window that looked out onto Pennsylvania Avenue, the one closest to the big door. And out there were the crowds, and they were yelling, impeach him and run him out of town, and he should resign. And one of the things that struck me also were the car horns, because in those days Pennsylvania Avenue was open to traffic. And people were honking their horns, responding to signs that said, "Honk if you think he should resign." So I looked at this and I listened to it, and it was a cacophony. It gave you a headache. Believe me, if the people outside knew, you could hear it inside the White House. There was no question about it. So I turned to Fred and I said, "Fred, why did you bring me here?" And he looked at me and he said, "I brought you here because you're going to remember this the rest of your life. This is what democracy looks like." And it did then, and it still does now. And thank you very much for coming today.